Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson, and I'm joined today by Olympia survivor, Max Zeta. How you doing,
Yep.
Max?
Doing well. Survived Las Vegas. Survived 2 days in Las Vegas at the Olympia. It was an
Not many
exceptional
people can
experience.
say that.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone died there, so I think everybody that went could also say that, but
Yeah.
I
Well,
also
the
don't know.
people who are dead won't be able to tell us otherwise,
That's
but
true. We
we'll
wouldn't
take
know.
your words for it.
We'd have no idea. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you doing, Josh? Does anyone ever ask you how you're doing?
I think so. I think so. I'm doing well. I wanted to do a few things before we started this show. I think this is the perfect time, which is to give a shout out to Zeba,
Oh yeah.
someone I coach her. I've been coaching her in powerlifting, and she did well. She did well.
Yeah.
Pulled a competition PR. I think squatted a competition PR, and her bench is just not. It's not great. But she did really well. Performed well. Always. She's the ideal athlete, and that every competition she's so far exceeds how she does in training
Yeah.
that even if you're like, man, I don't know what we're gonna do, she'll like pull out just a
Mhm.
massive deadlift. I mean, because she missed like a week prior a 130 deadlift, she pulled 142.5.
Yeah.
So I'm always super, grateful for having athletes like that who can just come through and be super clutch. Um, and then, I mean, shout out to Team Ada, who obviously just took a massive roster of athletes. So maybe you could talk about the Olympia for
Uh-huh.
us.
I think we had a third of the meet.
Wow.
We had, I think, maybe like 12 people or something like that. A lot of people lifted super well. PRs for a bunch of people. I know that, I want to say it was like Nikki did well. Um, I mean, like a huge group. Christina did well. Christina Spencer. Kevin performed okay. This was tough for a lot of people because a lot of people went to
Fast.
nationals beforehand,
Fast.
and at nationals it was like 6 weeks ago or something like that. So they were all wrecked.
Yeah.
So going into this was like much more of a for fun thing. So the people that went to nationals were already tired. They came into this, they did well, but they're kind of, it was more of like a let's just go and do it, and so yeah, it was a very cool, fun time. Um, but yeah, a bunch of PRs, a bunch of people did PRs. A lot of people had good meets. I think everybody had a good time. Um, Shout out to Melissa Lyons for just literally taking Joanne's spot and just jumping in the day before, which I don't think I've seen very often. Someone just hopped into a powerlifting meet, doing it, and had fun, squatting way too deep, like ass to grass, like it was comical, right? And
Squatting
like
correctly.
she told me she had not benched in like almost 10 years. So
Wow.
she had a world record. She had an all-time world record, about 10 years ago. Um, different numbers back then, but still like hilarious to like come back to this now and do it. Um, so yeah, it was like cool. It was a ton of fun. Suzette did okay. Um, Bliss was there. She did well. Made PR squat. Um, and then, just all around, it was like a fun time for everyone. Jade did well. I know I'm going to forget somebody because there were so many people. The first day we had like everybody, and then the next day we had two. So it was like
Wow.
9 people, then two. We were in Vegas the whole time, and Vegas is Vegas. You're, whatever, just doing whatever stuff. I didn't even go out and gamble or do anything. And I just went there, competed, coached, and then went home. But all
Now, let
that
me
being
ask
said,
the most important question.
yeah.
Did you have a Vietnamese coffee from Finn Smith?
Yes. Yes.
That's
So
like the best coffee.
dude, I almost wasn't gonna get it. So Keith, so you stayed with Keith before, Keith
Yeah.
and Melissa. I stayed with them, and on the way in, he mentions he's like, "Do you want a coffee?" And this is like Saturday, And I'm like, I'll just get one at the venue. Like, I don't care. Thinking he was just saying like he was going to be like, oh, there's like a Starbucks, there's
Yeah.
whatever. And I was like, no. He's like, well, it's a Vietnamese coffee. And he just kind of said those words. And normally I would never. I only drink black coffee.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I was like, yeah, you know what? Let me try it. Why not?
Yeah.
Man, I assume you got the same thing he got.
I got it as many times as I could in that trip.
It was, yeah, he said you went like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
It was so good. It was like,
Yeah.
Man, that was amazing. It reminded me a lot of like Singapore. Singapore has this really interesting coffee drink where they brew the coffee, then they ice it, then they put like condensed milk, not sweetened,
Yeah.
just condensed milk, and it's delicious. Like I love that coffee. But yeah, it was cool. It was like one of the only like super. It was extremely sweet, but has like this like sea salt foam. It's like Vietnamese coffee with a sea salt foam on it. I can't even describe how just so delicious it is. If I lived there, I would be 300 pounds of diabetic, and no problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. It was cool. That was funny. You remember that? Yeah, it was good meat. The meat was run well. Mike Marino does a great job running meats.
Yeah.
It was fun. Everyone had a good time. But yeah, overall, like just had fun. Had a good powerlifting meet. I want to do a lot more powerlifting stuff. We've been doing a lot more. We went to nationals this year. Brought a team. We did this. We brought a team. We're doing.
We did regionals, like we've been at multiple regionals. Yeah.
Yeah. We've run 2 USAPL meets in the gym now. We have another one on the books in January, and we'll do another one sort of like mid next year. We're going to try and do a huge like 2-day one if possible. We also want to try to do like a super total meet at the gym. So that'll be pretty cool. But yeah, like it's been cool. It's been fun to get a little more back into the powerlifting scene and get involved in it.
Yeah, and for people listening to this, if you are interested in getting coaching for powerlifting, weightlifting, super total, general strength, I mean, kind of anything related to just getting stronger and doing the lifts, snatch, clean, jerk, squat, bench, deadlift, reach out to Max or I, or both of us on Instagram, or you can go to teamada.com. I mean, if you want to talk to us, you can find us. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a link in the show notes. So if you want coaching and you want to PR like Eric did at the PNW state champs, clean jerk 166, like all the athletes that Max just mentioned, and all the like the plethora of people we work with, just reach out. So it's a stone's throw away. That what we wanted to talk about today is actually related to coaching, and it's kind of the 3. I'm going to say this tongue in cheek. It's like the 3 principles of coaching, success or coaching greatness. And it's 3 things we've kind of come up with, maybe not on our own, but we've heard it said and then kind of like connected the dots with our own experience coaching and said, yeah, these things are really, really important to be successful over a long, long span of time. Anyone can have a great workout. Anyone can have a great training week. Anyone can have a great, anyone can do a great, quote unquote program. Anyone can PR, right? But can you do that consistently? Can you coach someone for 8 years and on their, the last meet of that 8th year, the most recent one, they hit, a freaking huge PR. That's not easy or as easy. So we want to talk about our 3 kind of principles to coaching greatness. The first one, so I'll say the first one, and then I'll have you elaborate and kind of get your thoughts on what it means to you. But the first one is iterate as quickly as possible. So Max, what does that mean to you when I say that?
I would say to me, what that means is your goal should be to assume that you're always wrong, that your choices are always wrong, and that you're trying to be less wrong as you go. Rather than, because what that does is it sets your mindset up to be something that is forward looking into how can I improve anything I'm doing? Because it's like all these sports are very refined. And if you have the approach of constant iteration and doing that at a fast pace, you're more likely to get to a less bad choice sooner, which is ultimately going to have an impact on not just one athlete but everybody. If you start to realize, man, we're training with RPEs that are too high, everyone's just too slow and getting beat up and it's not right, and you iterate on that and you're like, okay, let's make adjustments, that trickles down as a method to everybody else. But it also gives you this sort of like constant approach to like looking at all the little things you could be improving, and so nothing becomes nothing should be in your mind did that, we figured it out, we're done with it, right? Like, oh, we know how to squat, we're never going to investigate any other possible better solution. It doesn't mean, though, constantly change.
Right.
It just means evaluate on a regular basis, maybe every, increment of time, every week, every month, every training cycle, whatever it is. Are the things we're doing things we can improve on? And that's just going to set you up to be, like a coach with a growth mindset, I think. Someone who's constantly improving versus being a coach who's like, I figured that out 20 years ago and I've never changed, right?
Yeah. I think part of that, you realize and I think what you're saying is you come up with, you basically an athlete comes to you and they say, hey, Max, write me a training program. And then this is basically what you would have to do. You take in whatever information you have, you would create something, anything. I mean, so they can literally do a workout. And then once they do that workout, once they do a string of workouts, we look at, okay, what happened? Did we expect that to happen? Right. And then is it what's desired? Because you can expect like, you might be pretty beat up, and you're like, oh, yeah, I was right. I expected that. You're too beat up. So is it what's desired? And then from that, it's okay. Do we keep doing it? Do we make an adjustment? Do we make a big modification? And then in which direction? My thought is, you're trying to basically start with the most basic framework and then iterate toward exactly what the athlete needs. And what that requires is this like willingness or openness to trying anything and everything within reason. So an example of that, and we mentioned this on the last podcast we did. So again, if people are listening and haven't listened to the most recent ones, I mean, we've been recording just some absolutely fire podcasts. In fact, the studio is burnt down that I'm actually in, but Danny has been doing safety bar squats, and I haven't used those in who knows how long in a program. And my buddy Michael Horner messaged me and he said, "Oh, I see you're on the safety bar squat train." And I told him, like, I'll do anything and everything. Like, I don't have a horse in this race. I don't need to be known as the box squat hater or safety bar hater or whatever it is.
Right.
It's like everything has a place. The place might be smaller or bigger, and it might be like, you might want to use something longer or shorter, but there's probably utility for everything. It's just like, does that utility overwhelmingly trump something else's utility? So a safety bar squat, does that give me something that like maybe a front squat can't? And I think in this case it does, because Danny's front squatted and it just kind of, it hasn't ended well when she's front squatted. It just like never really led us to a place where we're like, oh, that was really beneficial. And you just always kind of look back at the training and we're like, that was a waste. It just kind of we're chasing ghosts. We wanted to front squat a big number because it's cool, not because it's like developmentally appropriate. Mm-hmm. So, and I guess this is like what Glenn would say when he kind of talked about coaching, is like, do what's basic and do it for as long as you can, and then only can make it more complex when you need to. So that's kind of the idea I roll with and think about. And I think kind of what you're saying is, have your best guess. When things aren't working, adjust, iterate, get closer towards what will work, and then just be like completely agnostic to the means and methods and X's and O's of what it is. Like, if you have to squat 20 times a week to make progress and you tried everything else, maybe, right? Maybe if you literally tried everything else in every correct iteration of what that would be, it's just very unlikely to get there. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good way to frame it. I think a lot of it is just like, yeah, to sort of reiterate, it's like it's more a development of like the pace of iteration is going to be the thing that probably separates you from coaches who don't excel because you have this eagerness to be better,
Mm,
right? And if you are adopting that mindset, you're going to end up in a place that's better, faster, more likely, than if you didn't. If you're constantly searching for that, and that might just be that like the nature of like investigating, reading, talking to other coaches, looking at other programs. You develop an open mindedness about it rather than being like, oh, this is what works. We do it this way.
yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And one thing that I think, most people listening, I don't know if they've ever heard this formalized, but in the sense of like how to iterate on what you're doing, or like how you can, what you can do. There's a quote I really like. I don't know if I came up with it or someone else did, but it's like, if you have a question, if you're asking a question like, I wonder how this would work or how that would work, this exercise or format or whatever, someone's probably asked it, and
Yeah.
someone probably has an answer. So
Yeah.
I think it's like, we're not necessarily always working in the dark. If you can iterate on your process in an intelligent way and be like, not well read or evidence informed, but like up to speed with what we know, I think that allows you to do it more precisely, to where you're not just making kind of idiotic changes. I mean, because you can iterate and like,
Yeah.
oh well, we didn't make progress, and this person's kind of small and they're not super strong, so we should probably back off the frequency. It's like, I don't think squatting once a week is going to be a great like iteration. You can do that, you can make worse progress and then figure out that you need to squat more often. But I think like, take available information, iterate on the process, and that's going to kind of funnel you towards individualization, which is, I guess, kind of the cornerstone of this. So any last words before we kind of jump to the next one?
No, I like that.
Yeah. So the second one, and this is from David Burns, who actually, the podcast before this one, if you're listening to the podcast now, is with David Burns, and we talk about, it's kind of like those unicorn episodes that I'll put up. I did one with Stephen Hayes, Todd Cash, and W. Keith Campbell, like these titans in the field of psychology. So he has this quote which I really like, and I think encapsulates a style of thinking that we kind of champion, which is tools, not schools of programming, technique, training. So tools, not schools. So Max, when you think about tools, not schools, what does that elicit or bring to mind?
To me, I see it as you really just think about it. It's like you want to break things down into the most fundamental elements there are, the fundamental components. So like a school is like, and this is super common in weightlifting, the Chinese system, the Bulgarian
Yeah.
system, the whatever XYZ thing. And what those are is they're like crude ways of categorizing a consistency across training methods in a geographical region,
Yeah.
right? There were thousands of, there's hundreds of different coaches in Russia, hundreds of different coaches in China. I'm sure that they all do. I mean, everyone's doing the same things. They lift barbells to get strong, right? But to me, it's like, if you want to think about it from the perspective of like, you know, the Chinese system, okay, the Chinese school applies these 10 things that are unique to it, that therefore you do all of them in the system, and that's how it works. If you think of things from a perspective of tools, you look at it like, something like a high pull or a panda pull or whatever. It's like, okay, this is an element, this is a component. Can this be beneficial for somebody in a certain situation? And you could use it in that way. There's no need to be locked into the application of it or the use of something that, is essentially like independent of the fact that it's
Mm.
done in a geographical region. if it's beneficial, it's beneficial, right?
Yeah.
And so like I see it like that. What it really is it's a way for you, it's framing things for you to be, hey, any one exercise or method or idea or principle or any of these things could be applicable, could be useful. Don't don't kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, maybe is a good way to think of it. But at the same time, like you don't need to adopt everything for just, to use a particular element.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of great points. One of them is like the geographic location isn't like the thing. It's just like a collection of like tools that people use, and it happens to look like X, Y, and Z. It's like it happens to look like, what you see on the internet that like Lou will do and Lee Diane will do and Shizi Yang will do. And then you'll say like, oh, but they all pull really heavy, so that's their system. And it's like, no, that's something that they found works across time and probably works more often than not with the people that they work with. So I think the more interesting aspect of that is, why don't all systems or schools look the same?
Yeah.
And I think that's like an important question to ask. It's like, if it's that great, everybody should be doing it, because we're all trying to, everyone who's in weightlifting competing, they're trying to win.
Yeah.
So if you want to win, that means that by process of evolution, by natural selection, the most effective school of training should persist and win out. And the fact that that hasn't happened, it doesn't tell me that like, oh, people are stupid. It just tells me like, oh, that's probably not the best way for everybody all the time.
Yeah.
Or you would say, well, the coach is unable to do it or execute effectively or understand it. I don't think that's true, because there are a lot of people, and there are a lot of really smart people, and they all do things differently enough. So I would say that, like, by that logic, no school is the best. They all have their unique benefits and their drawbacks. So if we saw them as like tools, we could say, well, I like this tool. I do like heavy pulls or deadlifts for this type of athlete in this situation. And some of that might not even be athlete specific. You could say this athlete is weaker. They're built in this way. They're very, very proficient. Their ratios, they have very like high snatches and clean jerks compared to their strength lifts. Therefore, we should pull more often. The opposite, if you have the opposite person who's very, very strong, very, low percentage of snatch, clean jerk to squats and pulls. Well, you shouldn't do a ton of heavy deadlifting. It's like, well, what if the person can't do a lot of snatching and clean jerking for certain reasons, which could happen. You tweak your wrist or you have some hip issue. It's like, okay, well, we're going to deadlift heavy. It's like, okay, so, there's no all or nothing thing in that context. So I would say that I think, kind of to your point, a school is like a collection of tools of training that are used in, kind of more or less similar ways. And then they can vary based on needs and preferences. And that when you can see them as that, you can say, well, I like I like high pulls, or I like no contact lifts instead of, that lift is the devil because it's, for various reasons, or that thing's the devil. Yeah. So it's very, very little black and white thinking with this approach, which I believe allows you to iterate faster and do a better job more often, because of that. And then Max, you came up with the last one, so it's obviously the worst one. What was that? What's the third secret to coaching success?
So I would say, I think we kind of weren't sure on which one, but I would say it's going to be, I'm going to say this with a caveat. I'm going to say it's execution, but then the caveat would be that the first principles approach is necessary. And I say execution because all of this stuff is fantastic, but it always comes down to execution. This is always a game of execution. As a coach, as an athlete, you can iterate all you want. You can have every new idea. You can try different things. But if you're not applying that technique or that training methodology correctly or with, to the best of your ability, you're not executing well, the results will be subpar. And so what it does is it could muddy the water of everything. It's like if you didn't know how to squat correctly, like let's say you learned how to squat from reading a West Side Barbell article that was, published in 2004, and you applied that to, raw powerlifting,
Mhm.
and you're constantly searching for a different barbell or a different training method or anything like that. And it's like your squat's not going anywhere. It's like, well, your technique might be so bad that no anything else is going to really matter. So the execution has to be such that, you're actually, doing things correctly. And that's not the best example, but like, you know, if you let people lift with sloppy technique, they don't pause their bench presses. They press out their jerks. Like all these things are just simple, basic things that ultimately could stack up to look like a program is terrible when the reality is that you just really poorly executed a good program and got very subpar results. So I think that's a huge kind of the most critical element of coaching. And that's really what coaching is. It's the application of the knowledge of training, right? A coach interprets the science, the research, the experience, and then gets an athlete to, participate in that to the best of their abilities.
Yeah, and I think someone could try to be semantic and say like, well, you can't execute if you have the wrong information because you're just making a bad
Sure.
decision with bad information. But it's like, or you're making a good decision with bad information. I
Right.
don't think that's true. I think that the premise is you're working to understand, you're iterating and moving toward better, and then by trying to move toward better, you're able to execute with higher quality information. So I think all these things are kind of interconnected. When
Yes.
you talked about execution, I think where people, I've fallen prey to this, and I think where people fall prey to this is you have like this, you have like, I'm going to use these words in a very specific way, but I don't mean them literally. Is like you have this like window of adaptation, and you
Uh-huh.
can have the window kind of like more or less open. And the way you train, the execution of your training, the structure of it, that almost like dictates like how open that window is, how much you
Mhm.
can improve and make progress, that like the level and magnitude and direction of adaptation. If you squat, like you mentioned, kind of West Side style, right? Really, really
Mhm.
wide stance, sit back a ton, um, rotate bars all the time, dynamic, max effort. You can make progress. You can make progress for a
Right.
while, right? You have that. You're able to jam that window so open, and you're saying, "Whoa, look, well, we made a ton of progress." The problem is you don't have the counterfactual world in which you didn't do that and you made more progress.
Right.
A lot of this is like it's having to function off of probabilities, and it's
Sure.
saying like based on available evidence, based on what we know, based on what we can kind of infer, if you squat like that, you're not going to get as close to your potential as you can. If you squatted differently, you could. And like maybe, 5 years down the line, you change your squat technique and you improve and suddenly hit more PRs.
Right.
But like, you don't want to create this artificial ceiling and say, well, we did it the best way we could. And it's more so like we reached we kind of hit the top of, where we can go, or we kind of like drained the well of adaptation. I don't think that's true. I don't necessarily
Right.
think that's true. So,
Right.
so I think, thinking about really successful coaching, you have to have high quality information, and that has to be coming in constantly. You have to be able to iterate fast with it, and then you have to be able to execute. And iterate is like, how can we change it? Execution is, okay, can we then execute on the changes we want to
Yes.
make?
Yes.
Um, and then that's not seeing it as like, well, we're confined by, we need to pull heavier, squat heavier, do whatever on this day and whatever on that day. But okay, let's see what tools we need for the job. If we
Hmm.
need a hammer, we need a hammer. If we need a drill, we need a drill. If we need a saw, we need a saw. And then kind of like create a training plan, because that's all
Yeah.
we do, right? We basically we're cooks, and our recipes are programs.
I think, yeah, I agree with that 100%. I also, The one thing I would throw in there, kind of because I wanted to tack it on, but is like this first principles approach, because all of this has to be filtered through a lens of first principles, right? You can iterate all you want, but if you're chasing things in a way that doesn't make sense, right, you're wasting time. You can iterate fast and like, oh, we're going to continue to change bars, and like fundamentally you're missing the fact that you're just training way too little or way too much.
Mm.
You know, your tools are only so good as and they fall into the principles within the guidelines of what makes sense, right? You know, you can pick out little pieces of programs from different sports, you know, and that might actually be a very
Yeah.
intelligent thing to like look at, like, well, what are triathletes doing? Is there something I can draw from that? But if you know, you go way outside the bounds of specificity or whatever, you might end up missing, you know, the losing time because you're not directing things in the right way. So if you don't have a good fundamental understanding of the principles, everything else falls apart. And I think that's just become such an obvious thing now. Probably doesn't need to be said all the time, but I do think it's like one thing to always mention is that looking at everything through the lens of the principles of training will radically condense the amount of wasted time, because you just don't pursue things that are pointless, and you shouldn't, right? Or that they should be logically, like, you can look at it really quickly and be like, oh, that's not really going to work for me. That doesn't work to make weightlifters better. You know, cycling for 2 hours is probably not something that's worth trying.
Well, I think that there's like uh, uh, there's illogical thinking there, and that's I don't know what the formal name would be, but it's because two things appear kind of like side by side. You mistake them for having like a causative relationship, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, this CrossFitter did 20-minute WOD or whatever. I mean, whatever like wacky thing someone wants to do. You do a 1x20, and it's like, yeah, and then they had a 700-pound squat, and it's like, well, but because those things happen together doesn't mean that created that effect. I mean, it might have been like the stimulus for it, but it doesn't mean that like that's the correct stimulus for everybody. It
Right.
doesn't mean that's like an optimal way to program. So it's teasing out like how sensitive is someone to training, how adaptable are they. Just because Olivia Reeves does something doesn't mean everybody should do it. Maybe there's something to learn, but she's 3 standard deviations away from the mean. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
like quite literally, she's she's an outlier. She's
Yeah.
like so far away from the average that
Yeah.
you have to really be cautious when you interpret her training as
Yeah.
as something
Yeah.
you should do.
Exactly.
And that's everybody. So it's saying like, well, these outliers do this, therefore I should do that. It's like, no, that's not quite how that works.
Yeah.
And kind of confusing, success for, well, we should do that. Again, that's just like kind of an error in probabilistic thinking. So I like that. I like being principles led. I like being able to execute. I like iterating fast. I like
Mm-hmm.
using whatever tools kind of seem to satisfy the job. Um, I think those are the cornerstones of great coaching. You
For
know,
sure. I
and
agree with that 100%.
yeah. So hopefully people gained some insight from this, and they can think about their own processes. This isn't it's not a prescriptive podcast. It's not to say like, oh well, because it's tools not schools, I should do 3x10 because because I should use tools. It's just like which tools make sense for the job. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And it's like, also, don't, a lot of this is like learning there's the spirit of what you're talking about, and there's the, like, to the letter. It's like the idea of like iterating fast is not about like, oh, I've got to like
yeah,
do it right away.
yeah,
It's that like you shouldn't be afraid to try
yeah,
things. You know, tools and not schools is another thing where it's like, it's not about like, you know, saying that, hey, the combination of all these things doesn't matter because each thing's just an individual tool. It's like it might have an impact. There might be something to the system itself, but it also doesn't mean that like you have to, you have to only adopt that, or like you
Mm.
disregard one thing because it is, it's inside of a different school that you don't agree with, right?
Well, and I
Um,
think to that point, Max, like if you aren't a capable coach, if you don't know how to program, copying a school probably is going to be super helpful. You
Yeah,
know,
I mean it's a cheat code, right? It's like a
yeah.
fast way to get to something that's smart.
And then if you can iterate from that, so it's like if you almost say, I'm going to bypass coming up with my own process, and I'll just like co-opt, whatever it is. If you can say, where is it not working? I'm going to change that. That's
Hmm.
actually really good coaching. That's really
Yeah,
effective coaching.
yeah,
Now, at some point, you want to get closer to being less wrong faster, which is why you come up with your own template or process initially. But yeah, it's not bad to start from that place. So I think what you're saying is like there's merit to the opposite of what we're saying.
yeah,
It's just when that's all you have or the only way you can coach it, it kind of falls short.
totally.
Yeah. Awesome. I've been using the CoachLogik platform a lot lately, and the one thing that you wouldn't expect to be such a game changer and time saver is the multi copy and paste function. That has
That was
actually
nice.
saved me so
Yeah,
much time and so much frustration because
yes,
for so long I would go to drag individual workouts and the screen would move around and I had to be
yeah,
like
yeah.
super finicky with it. Now you literally just select all the workouts, scroll down to the training week, click a button, populates across.
Yep.
It's so freaking time efficient.
So there's a couple new things coming out this week. Um, is going to be the session summaries, I believe. So
Mm,
or the workout summaries. So at the end of the day, you'll get the summary that you can edit and send off. You'll get the maximized day view. So like you can maximize a single day on the calendar to be like a full size pop up. So you'll be able to see the whole day in a view that is um, just easier to deal with and
mm,
edit. So it's like a little bit easier to play with. And then you'll be able to navigate from there. So you can open up the day view, watch videos, and then swipe, to the next day and kind of deliver feedback that way or program that way if you want. Um, and then there's a bunch of other little stuff. We should get the kilogram pounds toggle back into the workouts, and like a whole bunch of other little like just cleanup stuff.
mm.
And then Kush is integrating a new library for video uploads, so it should be a lot faster. Should be better. So that's another big one. But yeah, I mean, like just constant stuff. And then we're going to be working on the long-term planner and
That's
pushing
awesome.
that out as soon as we can, probably in the next couple weeks, basically. I think that's going to be the biggest game-changing thing because it's like you'll be able to do all your programming from there, basically, and it will build it in a way that you can collect lots of data and aggregate it all into one place. So it's really easy to see what that data is telling you, where you'll be able to see like, the volumes for every week in a way that's very easy to understand. You'll see,
Mm.
week 1, 2, 3, 4, here's the volume of everything. You could look at each movement group. You could do all these other things. So that'll be something that, um, you know, yeah, will be really good for that overall.
Yeah, I think one thing I said to you kind of right before we jumped on this call, or started the podcast, which is all these things we're talking about, like all the cornerstones to to successful coaching. CoachLogik is basically doing it for you, right? Because the thought is make the app, the platform as good as great as possible for coaching. All those things are going to happen, right? It's going to change in a way that allows you to have a more effective, efficient process. It's going to give you more control over every aspect of the programming flow,
Yes.
decision making, choice points. And what I mean by that is like list of exercises and complexes and different ways to structure the training week, different analytics, and that allows you to think about training differently. So I think if anyone wants to improve their process or their processes, use CoachLogik, and you can go to app.coachlogik.com. You
Yep.
can sign up for the beta, and that's free of charge. And
You
I
don't
would
even need to
use
sign up.
that,
You just create an account and start using it.
create an account. I'd use that
Yeah.
to your heart's desire, right?
Yeah.
Because Max, I think Max and I disagree on this. He might say like, well, if you wait a little bit to use the platform, maybe it'll be a little more set up or a little more refined. I say you put everybody on there, and then you get better as fast as you can, which is
yeah.
use it to develop a familiarity, and then when all these changes get pushed, it's like you're on the beach, feet up, Mai Tai in hand. Right. And then a feature gets pushed. It's like instant refill.
I think there are currently about 240 people on there now, which is pretty good. So I'm ecstatic that we have that many. And the fact that we're, again, iterating as fast as we can, making constant changes. Like, I know it's not like lightning speed, but we have a very small team. We're hoping that we can grow that team fast and scale up to all the other stuff. Once we kind of get it going and start monetizing it, we'll really start a huge effort towards all the computer vision stuff. We have like bar tracking we can add to it, phase detection of lifts we can add kind of right off the bat. But really it's about like, let's get this thing to the point where we want the feedback loop from users to be as short as possible. And there's a Discord with people that put stuff in. People will leave requests in the Discord and it'll get done. Like we actually listen to that very intently and build it. So we want to know what you guys want, and we build it. And, the goal is to make this something that feels like it does a lot of what you want and kind of has all the little answers and details that are important to a coach, to coaches that do what we do, right? Barbell sports.
So I'd say it like this. Like, I think the other coaching platforms, they do everything, but in reality, they do nothing.
Yeah.
This will do everything, and in reality, do it all.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like, if you use unnamed coaching platform, it's like, I can kind of keep workouts on here and people can read them and do them. But like all these features, I don't use any of these features. None of these features are meaningful to me. And then you get on CoachLogik and it's like, okay, this was made for strength sports. Yeah. And like, and then in relation, like other sports, but like it was made for strength sports. Otherwise there wouldn't be a copy and paste function across.
Right. And a lot of it too is like, we want that 0 to 1 effect where we build a feature and it just does the most basic thing it's supposed to do, and then listen to the feedback people have. Hey, can I do this? Can we do that? Can we add this? Because then we're going to build something that really fits the market like a glove, right? Like everyone's going to get the product that really is what they should have. So yeah.
Wise words from the one of the smartest people in weightlifting. If you guys enjoy, if everyone enjoyed this show, which I'm assuming you did because it's the best weightlifting podcast currently available.
All 12 people.
I think I've seen the stats. I think we have quite a few more than that. I'm privy to the numbers. If you enjoyed the show, please share it around. Tag us. I only get positive feedback. People will text me, hey, love listening to this on my commute. So glad the podcast is up and running. Have you guys talked about this? What do you guys talk about that? I mean, people are reaching out about the coaching platform because they're just so gosh dang excited to use it and to get on it. So like I said, don't be the last one. Don't be the person who's kind of trying to play catch up and figure out the system. Because if you do it now, I promise you, your coaching is going to be that much better when you send an athlete to nationals or whatever level of competition, any meet, you're going to have them more prepared. And that's worth its weight in salt. So I am Joshua Gibson. That's Max Ada. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.